Hi, this is Kelly Sadler with Politically Unstable. Today, I'm joined by Representative Loudermilk. He is, let me get this right, the chairman of the House Administration Committee's Oversight Subcommittee.
That's correct.
That's correct.
It's a mouthful, but it's correct.
I had to write it down. I wasn't going to memorize it. But you're doing a lot of work uncovering the truth of what happened on January 6th. And your team released an initial report this month, and you wrote a column for us in the Washington Times, basically saying why it's important to get to the bottom of exactly what the failings were that led to January 6th. Could you kind of summarize what you found in your initial reports and what the American public might not know if they just listened to the January 6th committee?
Right. Well, when this committee was first started at the beginning of last year, when Kevin McCarthy was Speaker, he had asked me to chair this committee with really two purposes. One is to look at the security failures of the Capitol on January 6th, basically meaning regardless of who it was or why they were trying to get in, they should have never been able to get into the Capitol, where it was definite security failures. The other side is to look at the operation of the Select Committee on January 6th, how the committee was established, how they operated, and their final report. So I agreed to take on this task under one condition, is that we went after the truth, and regardless of what the truth was, that's what we would report to the American people, because I already knew that there was a lot of political influence with the Select Committee, and we wanted to go beyond that. This wasn't about vindicating anybody or prosecuting anyone. It was getting to the truth, because I think it's important that people are going to make their own minds up about things, and there's going to always be conspiracy theories. But I trust the American people that we should be transparent, get the truth out to the American people, and let them decide what really happened that day. And so that's really what we've been after. And we really worked pretty much in the shadows for a year because it was a collective effort with everyone on the team trying to collect documents. We found out really quickly, even though the Select Committee, they were supposed to hand over all the information that they acquired in their investigation, we found out very soon that they did not. There was certain information that they had sent to executive branch agencies, which appeared that they were trying to keep us from having easy access to those. Some documents had been heavily redacted. But probably the most egregious was that they never passed along any video tapes. They video recorded every deposition and transcribed interview, which they did over 1,000 of. They never handed over any of those, and they claim that they don't exist anymore. And that is not only in violation of House rules, but also in violation of good committee practice. I mean, especially they used clips from some of these videos in their official hearings, as were televised. And so we went on a pursuit to actually find all these missing documents. Wrote letters to the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson, who admitted to sending letters off to the White House, Homeland Security, also that they did not keep any of the videotapes, but because they just decided they didn't need to.
So did they destroy the videotapes? Where are they in existence anymore? Like, where are they?
I have to believe they are in existence somewhere, but no one seems to know anything about them. Even Liz Cheney, who really was the de facto chair of the committee, as we found out, she was running everything. She wrote in her book how important it was to have these videotapes and to preserve them. So, we don't know what happened to them. It's really strange the way the committee operated. Normally, you would bring the House recording studio in to actually record depositions. So we went to the House recording studio to see if they had kept copies, and they told us they didn't. The Select Committee didn't operate in the normal fashion. They only borrowed the House recording office's equipment, their studio's equipment. They didn't even allow the House recording studio to be present in the depositions. So whoever it was, whether it was the Hollywood producer that ended up with them or a contractor, we're not sure, but we're still pursuing to find all of these videotapes, because it's important. As I talked to the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson, he said, well, you have the written transcripts Well, first of all, we didn't have all the written transcripts, but we did have quite a few. But what you're missing in a written transcript is body language, voice inflection. As one of the members of our committee, who is an attorney, said, there is a big difference between answering the question, I shot the clerk, versus I shot the clerk.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a big difference there, right? And so there's also sidebar conversations that you can pick up on. So it's important that we get those. We also found out that according to the chairman, that they handed over 4.5 terabytes of digital data to us. Well, we didn't receive 4.5 terabytes. We had, I think, 5 or 6 hard drives they turned over. Only had, it was less than 3 terabytes. So we hired a forensics company to come in and do a low-level scrub of those hard drives, and we uncovered thousands of deleted documents. Now, you expect some deleted documents because we all delete documents in our normal course of business, right? But what was most interesting is we recovered most of the recovered documents that we found to be unique, meaning they weren't just copies of something we already had. There was over 100 of those that were password encrypted, that no one seems to know what the password is. And but there were a couple of documents that weren't encrypted that we were able to recover that were associated to some transcripts that we did not have. And ironically, those were deleted literally 2 days before Republicans took over the House of Representatives.
Now, Kevin McCarthy, before he left Congress, he told the January 6th committee to save all of their documentation so that it could be handed over to a Republican majority. Clearly, that did not happen.
Right.
Is there going to be any accountability? Are the Democrats going to be able to get away with this? Is Liz Cheney going to be able to get away with this? Where does the accountability fall here?
And that's a good question. And that's on a lot of people's minds, including ours. We still have a lot more investigative work to go. There's still more documents that we need to get our hands on. And all that we've uncovered so far is leading us down more paths. So we're going to focus continuing on the investigation. But at the same time, we need to look at accountability. And we're kind of in uncharted waters when it comes to this, is the blatant violations of not just the formality of Kevin McCarthy sending a letter is one thing, but when you're in violation of House rules, and in this case, it would be the rules that the Democrats passed themselves. We were operating under their rules. And there is clear guidance from the clerk's office of what has to be kept. And they were in violation of all of those, even though their claim is, we have the ability to decide what we want to keep and what we don't. Well, that's not the case. So we do have to establish accountability, one, so this doesn't happen again. And two, it's just, the words don't describe the violation of public trust from this select committee, who cherry-picked evidence to support a predetermined narrative and then hid anything that was contrary to this narrative that they were producing. They kept it from the American people and tried to keep it from us as well. And so this is something that should not happen in America, especially under a government that's supposed to be small and transparent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things that you discovered kind of going through the documents was Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony. Right. Now, she was their star witness. And for the audience, if you don't recall, she testified that President Trump lunged in the beast in the car and tried to take over the steering wheel to get to the Capitol. It was really sensational stuff in her testimony. But what you uncovered is that there was other people in the White House and other Secret Service agents that also testified, saying that event never transpired. It was make-believe. It was all made up.
And that was exactly what we uncovered. But the interesting aspect of it was, and I'm not questioning Mrs. Hutchinson, whether she told the truth or not. What I'm questioning is the select committee going with her sensationalized stories after she had already testified 3 times that basically nothing happened. After her third testimony, she has a meeting with Liz Cheney. After the meeting, she fires her existing attorney, and then Liz Cheney finds her a different attorney. And after that, she calls Ms. Hutchinson back in for another testimony, but this time It's in Liz Cheney's hideaway office in the Capitol that only Liz Cheney and Ms. Hutchinson, a court reporter and a videographer, are present. Not even the other members of the committee knew this was going on. This is where these sensational stories came out at that point. After that hearing, Liz Cheney calls the other members of the committee, shows them the videotape of her testimony, and then they rushed to have an emergency televised hearing where they paraded Ms. Hutchinson before the entire world with these sensational stories without trying to corroborate them at all. They didn't even call the driver. You would think the first person you would want to talk to is a Secret Service driver.
Exactly right. It's not that hard to track that down to see if it happened or didn't happen.
But she did this testimony in June. They didn't even interview the driver until September. And I told our team, I said, when we start looking at these, when we get these transcribed interviews that we've been looking for, when we find them, look at the questions they were asked, but more importantly, look at what they were not asked. So you have this driver, which Ms. Hutchinson claims that President Trump tried to pry the steering wheel away from him to make him go to the Capitol. You know, they never asked him anything about that when they called him in for testimony. Seriously, they didn't even ask him about the incident. He had to interject it on his own. And we found this to be consistent with a lot of people. If they sensed that someone was not going to testify in the way that the committee wanted them to, they would either not ask the question, or in other cases, they didn't like the answer that was given. They would try to change the question up several ways to get them to change their answer. So it was clear to me that they were only looking for evidence that supported the idea that Donald Trump organized and executed the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. When you look at the report, now there was a team that was part of the select committee, broke up into different teams. And one of the teams was tasked with looking at the security failures of the Capitol. We can't even find hardly any documentation from that team. We've heard from members of that team that they did a lot of work into security failures, but all of that was suppressed, and it appears that that wasn't even preserved. So I don't know if they found some things out that they weren't supposed to, or it was just Liz Cheney's, it didn't fit her narrative. But a good illustration is the name President Donald Trump is mentioned 1,900 times in the select committee's final report. But pipe bombs are only mentioned 5 times, and it's more like in passing. So it tells you right there, even though they weren't tasked with looking at the White House or the president himself, they were tasked with security failures. The path they chose to go was a political path, not to get to the bottom of something.
Well, and the security failures is a huge issue, right? Because you don't want something like this to happen in the future, happen again, no matter who's involved with it. So it seems like you'd want to rectify whatever failures you had on that day to ensure, everyone's safety moving forward. Now, on that topic, your report also highlighted that, and this was brushed over by the mainstream media and by the committee, that Donald Trump offered 10,000 National Guards on January 5th to make sure nothing got out of hand. That was never brought to our attention. I mean, very in passing it was, but it was never really highlighted. What other security failures on that day have you guys found, if any?
There were numerous. The Capitol Police, the frontline officers who literally fought a war in certain areas of the Capitol, were just overwhelmed and unprepared. Most of them performed valiantly, and they want answers as much as everyone else. But there were significant failures in the leadership of the Capitol Police, especially when it came to intelligence. We found out that there was credible intelligence. This is why Donald Trump had pre-approved up to 10,000 National Guard troops, was based on intelligence that most of the executive branch agencies knew of. The FBI had even informed the Capitol Police intelligence of what they had found out, that there was a credible credible intelligence of a potential attack on the Capitol on January 6th.
So Nancy Pelosi would have known that too.
That is, we would assume that she did. The interesting thing is the Capitol Police intelligence received that information, but never passed it along to the leadership of Capitol Police. The chief of police was never told of that level of intelligence. In fact, in the morning of January 6th, they even sent out an intelligence report that basically said there's very little probability of violence, which was the exact opposite of what the FBI was sending to the Capitol Police. So even the President of the United States knew of the threats against the Capitol days before. That's why he pre-authorized the National Guard to be ready to be deployed. He cannot deploy the National Guard because of the separation of powers in the Constitution. It has to be requested from the House of Representatives. We're also running down some other leads informants have given us, and one of those is that the Secret Service offered Nancy Pelosi fencing to go around the Capitol on January 6th based on this intelligence, and she turned it down because she didn't like the optics. We know that she didn't like the optics of National Guard. That's why with the 7 requests that Chief Sund made for the National Guard, both before January 6th and on January 6th, it took him 7 attempts before they actually sent the National Guard, and it actually took shots being fired inside the Capitol before it would be approved. Even after it was approved, it took hours for the National Guard to actually be sent, even though they had already been readied for deployment. So this is another area that we're looking into is what was the significant delay of getting the Guard that had already been ordered to be ready to deploy and have been given the orders? How in the world did they sit on a bus or sit in a armory for 2 additional hours before they came to the Capitol?
That's unbelievable. And just to clarify, it's the Speaker of the House who is in control of basically the security tenants and the Capitol Police and whatnot. It's the speaker. It's whoever is the Speaker of the House at the time, and that was Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, and it was more so at that time. Since then, there has been some changes to give the Chief of Police and the Capitol Police Board a little more authority. But yet, as the Sergeant at Arms on January 6th said in response to Chief Sund, is I've got to run this request up the flagpole, and I don't think they're going to like it. Now, you run it up the chain. The chain is to Nancy Pelosi.
Okay. Now, another thing, and this, I found this curious in your report, is the role of Fani Willis. She's been in the news lately for the RICO case that she's pursuing against the president in Fulton County, Georgia. How did she interact with the J6 committee?
Well, that is actually something that was news to us that we didn't realize. And it's interesting. There was no documentation that we had originally found in what was handed over to us. Now, when all these documents, these million plus printed pages of documents that were handed over from the select committee, they really weren't indexed or cataloged. They were just sealed and put in boxes. So we spent a lot of time going through them. We just happened to come across a letter from Fani Willis to the select committee requesting documents. And that was all. There was nothing there was no return correspondence or, hey, here's what documents are you looking for? It was just this one lone letter. So I asked the former chairman, Benny Thompson, about it. And I believe it was one of the Washington Times reporters even went to him and asked him about it. And at the time, he claimed we never had any interaction with Fani Willis. But it does reference it in their final report that they were working with her, but that was just a passing reference. Then, as we had sent a preservation letter to Cassidy Hutchinson's current attorneys, asking them to provide all the information she provided to the select committee to us, their initial response to me was a 2-page letter talking about how she's been, abused and mishandled and, accused of things, and basically told me, do not bully this young lady. But just stuck in the middle of this letter was a reference to her working with the Fulton County DA, Cassidy Hutchinson working with them. That was news to us that came from their attorneys. So that kind of turned a little bit more of a spotlight on Fani Willis for our investigation. And so we're still looking into it. But from what we can gather, just from information we're getting from informants as well as documentation that we're pursuing, is there was a continuous interaction going on between the committee and the Fulton County investigators, that there was more than just one occasion of them asking for documents it appears that they were coming to D.C. and going through documents while the investigation is going on. This is unprecedented. It isn't uncommon for a congressional committee, especially select committee, that once their work is done, make criminal referrals. We don't have any power to hold anyone other than other members of Congress accountable, right? That's a Justice Department role. But they are working with a district attorney at a state level, providing them with evidence while their investigation is ongoing. And this is highly concerning because we already know the Select Committee was suppressing exculpatory evidence from the American people. Were they also keeping that information from Fani Willis? So these are questions that I think could have great implication on that case.
Well, it sounds like the J6 committee was doing their investigations and meanwhile deploying her to build her case against the former president since they didn't have that power. There's a lot of there's a lot of suspicion, right? People need to be skeptical of exactly what was produced out of that committee, what the lies, what the truth is, because you're right. It's hurting our institutions and our faith in our country and the independence of, the judicial branch versus the congressional branch and the executive branch. There also, and I just kind of to wrap this up, there also were some conspiracy theories about you and your role in January 6th. And the media hyped that up, that you were giving tours and kind of laying the foundation for an insurrection. Can you kind of just dispel that and explain kind of what your initial report says?
Yeah, that was very interesting. And one of the reasons that Kevin McCarthy selected me to lead this committee is I told him, I said, if I'm going to do this, the first thing they're going to come out with is the false accusations that were made against me. And he said, but you have experience dealing with the committee and you know how they operated because of what they did to me. They actually edited information and they hid exculpatory information so they could build a narrative that somehow I was giving reconnaissance tours to insurrectionists the day before, when in reality, it was a family with small children that were coming to D.C., that we had met them at a church back home, a nice family. They, in their own words, were coming to D.C. because they had never heard Donald Trump speak before, and they knew this was maybe the last time they could ever hear him speak as president of the United States. So they wanted to come hear him. They just came here to listen to the speech. There were 7 or 8 other people on the bus with them, all from Georgia, most of them from our district. When they called that morning, we had scheduled for them just to come to my office and meet with me, and then we were going to go to lunch somewhere. But because of COVID, they shut down all the restaurants in town. So they called and said, hey, we have these other folks from Georgia. They've never been to Washington, D.C. They've never met a congressman. Can they come over as well? I'm like, sure. The buildings are open. We'll bring you in my office. And they all came and met in my office for about 45 minutes and talked and took pictures. Because they had expected to go to dinner, to lunch with us, I said, look, we have a public cafeteria here in the House office buildings. We can just all go down there and have lunch there, which we did. Took them all together. They were escorted the whole time. Took them to the gift shop afterwards where they could, buy some House of Representatives souvenirs. Yeah. And as we were taking them to leave, we took them to see a little display area in one of the House office buildings. I got called to vote. So the 2 young boys wanted to see the trolley system that takes us to the Capitol. So they walked with us down there and waved as I got on the trolley. My wife escorted them out of the building. They took the videotapes, the select committee did, of me escorting them through the buildings and edited them and then narrated on top of them things that, why was I taking them in places that are normally not visited by visitors to Washington, D.C. That was ridiculous because where I took them is what we call Main Street in the Longworth office building because it's where the cafeteria and gift shop and all that is. Right now, I could take you down there and it's loaded with visitors, right? But it was a routine visit, right? From constituents. Exactly. It wasn't even a tour. It was a visit, and the Capitol was closed. They never got even close to the Capitol. And the committee knew this. Even the U.S. Capitol Police wrote a letter exonerating this, saying we are trained to notice suspicious activity and there was nothing suspicious about this. But the select committee, it was too good of a story and they were getting a lot of mileage out of it. So they reissued the story again. See, they would send letters asking you to come testify, but they didn't send it to me. They sent it to CNN. So I actually found out about this when my wife sees it pop up as a news feed, right? And so we ended up getting over 200 death threats because of the way that the committee presented this, because they wanted to make a good story. When I took over the committee, the first thing we did is we went and pulled all the information that they had acquired. I was shocked. They had subpoenaed two of the visitors because these two visitors actually used a debit card to buy their gifts at the gift shop. So they were able to contact them, turned them over to the FBI. Well, they have found out that the FBI had already visited these folks and determined that they didn't do anything wrong. But the select committee continued on with the narrative, subpoenaed them, subpoenaed all of the information off their phones, every picture they took, every video they took, and they found nothing. In fact, there was one of the visitors, they were asking, you were doing some very suspicious activity because most of the time we see you on the cell phone. What were you doing on the cell phone? He was talking to his credit card company because he forgot to tell them that he was going to travel and his wife was stuck on the other side of DC and couldn't get an Uber to come over because they were denying his credit card. They even pulled his phone records to prove that.
What a violation of privacy. I mean, this is Banana Republic stuff here that you just wouldn't think could happen to anyone. And these are just innocent civilians that are coming on a tour of your office building, and now they've got the FBI stuck on them. Like, this is insanity.
It is. And all of this information that they got was a month before they made the accusation. Basically, they knew that there was nothing to the story an entire month before they made the accusation. I was interviewing someone who this person wants to remain anonymous at this point for obvious reasons, but he's told me he was in the room when they decided to make the accusation. And the investigators, the professional investigators, said, do not make this accusation because you have no evidence. But it made too good of a story. And so they went ahead and made the accusation. They doxed two of the people that were here that day. One of them has already lost a job. But the most egregious part of this, none of those folks were in the Capitol on January 6th. Most of them were at the Ellipse, and then they went back to their hotel. Mm-hmm. Two of them walked toward the Capitol, but they got as far as a reflecting pool and decided, let's just go to lunch. They went to lunch. They were never even close to any of the violence, and the Select Committee knew this. But they were desperate to tie members of Congress into their scenario as well. And that's why they were casting a broad net. They not only cherry-picked evidence, they manufactured evidence, and they edited evidence to make it look suspicious. But they never consider what they're doing to the lives of the people that they're making false accusations about.
This is absolutely incredible. And I thank you and applaud you for the work that your subcommittee is doing, because the truth needs to come out. And as we know, the DOJ has arrested up to more than 1,000 people associated to January 6th that weren't, some of them not even in the Capitol on that day. And it's a miscarriage of justice in a lot of regards. So I appreciate you taking the time, and everyone that's working for you, because going through boxes and boxes of evidence, it must be tedious. But thank you, Congressman, for the work that you're doing. And please keep us posted with the findings as you get through it.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you very much.
Thank you.